your screen. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Ms. Wendy E Simmons, presenting her new book, My Holiday in North Korea. Ms. Simmons graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from George Washington University. Her weekly columns on travel can be found at the Huffington Post, and her award-winning photographs have been featured in numerous exhibitions and juried shows across the country. She is also president of Vendaloo, a consultancy she founded in 2001, and chief brand officer of a New York City-based global eyewear brand. In this book, she offers readers a glimpse of North Korea as it's never been seen before. Gifted with a remarkable voice and eye, she combines her remarkable cache of photographs and a natural storyteller's skill to bring this long, secretive world to life. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Ms. Wendy E. Simmons.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming. I know the weather is terrible, and it was an effort to make it here at rush hour in the rain, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to read just a couple of passages, chapters from the book, and then most people have had quite a number of questions about North Korea, so I'll leave it open to that afterwards so I can answer any questions. First, I'm going to just read a passage that gives a good overview of who I am and why perhaps I went to North Korea. I am and have always been a traveler. Exploring the world, meeting its people, experiencing their lives, and sharing what I see are my greatest passions. I've traveled to more than 85 countries, including territories and colonies, many of which I've been to multiple times, and I'm struck more and more, not by our differences, but by our similarities. Beneath all the chopping of politics and religion, and apart from variations in the way we live our daily lives, I've come to understand how fundamentally the same we are as human beings. Then I went on holiday to North Korea, and like Alice in Wonderland, I fell through the rabbit hole. This is my tale. So I'm going to read the first chapter to you. It's called Arrival. It was June 25th, 2014. China Air Flight 121 touched down at Pyongyang's Sunan International Airport and taxied to a stop on the tarmac. The cabin door opened. I disembarked the airplane and descended the passenger boarding stairs. I was alone, a tourist in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, unaccompanied by an organized tour group or international liaison, unlike most other visitors to the country. I'd never been more excited. Aside from our plane, 12 or so fellow passengers, the half-dozen soldiers and airline employees who'd met us at the bottom of the stairs, and a giant, smiling portrait of Kim Il-sung affixed to the side of the terminal building, the area was completely empty. There were no baggage trains, no food or fuel trucks, no conveyor belt vehicles or vehicles of any kind for that matter. There were no ground crews doing their jobs. There were no other planes. We were it. One of the soldiers pointed me in the direction of the terminal building. I walked to the entrance and went inside. That 20-foot walk to the terminal's entrance would mark the last time I was allowed outside alone for the next 10 days. The inside of the terminal was as devoid of normal airport activity as the outside was. Something I would have expected had we just landed on a small island in the Philippines or a dirt runway in Uganda, but not in the capital of North Korea. There were 3 booths for immigration, 2 for regular people, and a 3rd for diplomats and other government officials. As if it was inconceivable that a foreign woman would travel alone to North Korea and not be a diplomat, my fellow passengers kept urging me to join the diplomatic line. I stayed put. I didn't want to risk deportation trying to impersonate a diplomat when I hadn't even been imported yet. When it was my turn, I walked up to the counter, laid my papers and passport down, smiled and chirped, "Hello." The agent grunted back without making eye contact. He took one paper from me, stamped another, and handed it back with my passport, and I was in. I was euphoric. The most exciting moments in my life, when I feel most alive, happen when I'm touching down anywhere in the world I've never been. I am reborn into a new world where everything is a curiosity to wonder at, and even the smallest accomplishment is a victory. There was nothing but discovery and learning ahead of me, and I was in North Korea, the most reclusive country on earth. This was going to be amazing. Even though I'd done research to make sure the size and type of camera and lens I brought would be acceptable, cleared my iPhone of any applications I thought might be questionable, and had declared all of my other electronic devices in cache on my immigration forms, I still felt trepidation as I approached security. "Cell phone," demanded a guard. I'd read online that North Korean officials take your cell phone and examine it but give it back nowadays, so I handed it over without argument. I put my bags on the baggage scanner, which looked about 100 years old, and walked through the also ancient metal detector. After being patted down, I stood watching as a gaggle of guards, maybe soldiers, huddled in a semicircle around my phone. I couldn't imagine what they were doing with it since it was locked. Installing a listening device, recording device, they were probably just trying to unlock it. After a few minutes, a guard returned my phone and pointed to a set of doors, indicating I was free to go, but my luggage was still inside the baggage screening machine. I pointed to the machine and politely said, "Bags?" hoping my luggage was merely trapped in the scanner's inner sanctum, not confiscated. When the guard realized what I was saying, he began shouting at the other guards, who in turn began shouting at one another as another guard worked to dislodge my bags. To slake the mounting chaos, I smiled and jokingly said, "Don't worry, happens all the time." I was summarily ignored. Reunited with my bags a few minutes later, I emerged from security and was greeted by my two smiling, seemingly blissful North Korean handlers, the people who would be my near constant companions until I returned to the airport 10 days later. Older handler stepped forward and introduced herself first. She was prim, wearing decades-old clothes that looked part Star Trek, part 1960s air hostess uniform, only not stylish, and in ugly colors. If we were the cast of a TV show, older handler would be the neighbor lady who always tries so hard to look put together, just so, but can't quite pull it off. Older handler then introduced me to her subordinate, fresh handler. Older handler told me she was fresh at her job, that is, she'd only been a guide a short time. Fresh handler was young and diffident, and something about her shaggy punk haircut and sweet demeanor told me I'd like her best. As fresh handler said hello, older handler unabashedly looked me up and down, sizing up, as I would be called throughout my trip, the American imperialist. Then, without taking a breath, in a tone slightly less than suspicious, "You first time come Korea? You been South Korea? You been Japan? You speak Korean?" Me. Yes, 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 no. North Koreans' antipathy for Americans cannot be overstated. They are taught aggressively from birth that the United States is their number one enemy, that Americans are imperialist pigs hell-bent on occupying North Korea, and that we may attack North Korea at any time. The party espouses this rhetoric to maintain its absolute power over the North Korean people. If there's an enemy from which the people need protecting, the party can be their protector. We exited the airport, and I was introduced to driver, who had spiky hair and was standing next to our car smoking. He half grinned, revealing several gold teeth, and then took my bag and loaded it into the boot. Older handler directed me to sit in the back seat next to fresh handler and took the senior position in front. My "North Korea is great, America is not" indoctrination began immediately. The car doors had barely closed when older handler uttered, "Our dear great leader" and "American imperialist" for the first time. As we drove from the airport to our first tourist attraction, the Arc of Triumph, older handler turned to me with a smile plastered across her face and said, "Do you know what today is?" Me, Wednesday? Which was true. Older handler, "It's June 25th, the day the American imperialists invaded our country," which was not true. On June 25th, 1950, nearly the opposite happened. North Korea invaded South Korea. Unsure what etiquette dictated in such a situation, I awkwardly said nothing, hoping the conversation would end. She asked me the question again, perhaps thinking I hadn't heard her the first time. I offered the same answer. Unsatisfied with my response, older handler responded, her smile unperturbed. "It's the day your country invaded our country." Me, "Oh, that's a coincidence then that I arrived today." I quickly glanced at fresh handler with a look that said, "Ack, how did I screw this up already?" And like the new best friend I knew she would be, she smiled back at me, the equivalent of, "Don't worry." I looked back at older handler, whose smile was now gone. Like a 1-2 knockout punch, older handler said something to fresh handler and driver. Then driver pulled the car over, and older handler and fresh handler switched seats. Older handler looked at me and said, "Now I watch you more. Welcome to North Korea." Yeah. So that's the cast of characters in the book. Me, fresh handler, older handler, and driver. And I spent every second I was in North Korea with the three of them unless I was alone in my hotel room, which was very infrequently. It was from usually 8 p.m. at night until about 7:30 in the morning. And I was there for 10 days alone with these people, so I got to know them very well, and that's the crux of this book. So in addition to being about my experiences, it's about my relationship with these people. And the thing about North Korea, which many of you may have learned in the past week, because it was in the news a lot because of the Congress that they held for the first time in 36 years, the majority of your visit is staged. It's, everything is pretend. Although, because I was there for so long, they kind of ran out of things to do with me, number one, and number two, they started slacking a bit because, they're people, they're real people. But this is an example that I'm going to read of something that was staged, a typical visit for me. And by the way, as I was alone, they would take me to usually 8 to 10, maybe 12 things a day. It was exhausting. And at each thing, because it was a propaganda tour, it was staged. So this was an example. This is chapter 6, and it's called "And Then There Were Two." We pull up to the front gate of the Paeksan Food Factory in Pyeongchang for my scheduled tour. When no one meets our car, driver begins to honk with ever-increasing urgency and yells furiously until the military check meant to be guarding the entrance stumbles out of her booth, disheveled and abashed. It quickly becomes clear she is both out of uniform and has been sleeping. I am beyond entertained as I watch her hurriedly try to pull herself together. Hat on, shirt buttoned up, tucked in, halter belt thing on, etc., while she frantically runs back and forth from the gate to the factory. I'm no expert on the NOCO system of rule, but I'm pretty certain that being out of uniform is bad, and being asleep even worse. But both? Ugh, ouch. Her cartoon-like scrambling is amazing, and immediately makes my shit might be realist. After 3 or 4 sprints to the inside of the factory and back, she enters and exits her booth one last time, then lifts the gate and motions us inside. As we step out of the car to an empty parking lot, we are met by the local guides and the factory manager. It's then that older handler tells me the shocking news. A mere 5 minutes earlier, the factory unexpectedly lost power, forcing it to close and send all 5,000 employees home. We will still be allowed inside, but there will be no people to see and nothing working. A group of Brits who happen to be visiting the factory at the same time seem to enjoy peppering their handlers with questions they must know will result in inane answers. Brit: so, all 5,000 people have just left the building 5 minutes ago and gone home then? Or are they all waiting in the lunchroom for the power to come back on? Local guide: yes. Having spent some time in factories and not being a complete idiot, I too can smell a ruse. All the surfaces, machines, and equipment are pristine. It seems unlikely, nay, impossible, to manufacture the purported plethora of products on the same 2 lines with just a few different machines. And all 5,000 people left mere minutes ago, and there isn't a single shred of physical evidence that even one human has ever worked here, except for, of course, the napping guard. But more importantly, I'm pretty sure if the factory she is single-handedly tasked with guarding did just lose power 1 to 4.5 minutes ago, causing it to unexpectedly close down and send 5,000 workers home, or be held in the lunchroom, she would be fully clothed or at least awake, if not both. Lest you think I doubt the veracity of older handlers' claim based on the actions of one unkempt napping guard and solid housekeeping, on our approach to the factory, on the only road in, we hadn't seen a single person coming the other way. Certainly there had to be a straggler or two. Someone with a limp? My bewilderment grows once our tour of the factory begins. I'm so stupefied by the factory's control room that I forget to take a photo of it. First, there are no electronic displays or control panels of any kind anywhere in the room. Second, there are no electronic control panels or displays anywhere in the room. There are 2 barren desks, 4 chairs, and 3 dormant monitors affixed to the walls that I would swear aren't real, but rather are those fake molded plastic prop flat screen monitors used by home stagers, realtors, and furniture stores. That's it. There aren't even pencils in the room. I don't believe anyone's ever been in this room, let alone controlled factory operations from it only minutes ago. Next comes the showcase of products room, which begged the question I kept finding myself asking of NOCO. If you're going to go to all the effort to put your best foot forward, why not try a little harder to make it look better? Which is not to say the white lacquer bookshelf all-in-one lined up next to each other along the wall and the bevy of beverages and classy packages didn't look pleasing, it just could have looked better. Unexpectedly, we come upon two workers who have, for some reason, stayed behind to finish making the biscuits after their 4,998 co-workers so quickly departed. The local gutter factory manager, I can't remember, declares these workers heroes. We watch them, their heads down, doing nothing for a few minutes, and then my group moves on. As usual, I stay behind watching, wondering what it all means, and as usual, fresh handler, always patient during my extended reveries, stays with me. Eventually, one of the workers looks up and stares right back at me, and then she gives me the stink eye. My second stink eye in as many days. But it's also one of the few genuine things I've encountered, so I snap her photo, adding it to my shit I think might be real list, and to fresh handler's great pleasure, we move along. Ta-da! So now, usually I let people ask questions because people have so many questions about North Korea, and I'm happy to answer any of them, either about my trip or the country, which is really the same. So can I answer any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Were you scared at any time? I mean, with all that was going on, and then when you see that this guy was just put in hard labor for 14 years, and you know what the country was like, how could you deal with not being terribly afraid of everything?
I get asked that a lot, and I just wasn't. I really wasn't. They made me very comfortable. They were very nice to me. Towards the end, I was more frustrated and tired of being there. And it crossed my mind towards the end, this notion, I hope I don't have to stay here longer. But I was never fearful. I never had that sense of fear. I just had a sense of tiredness and frustration. The frustration was overwhelming. Confusion and frustration more than fear.
Would you ever go back there under the guise that they wanted you to come back?
I would love to go back, but I would never go back because I'm pretty sure as a result of this, they would kill me. I don't even think they'd put me in prison. I think they would just, yeah. In fact, there was an article I read somewhere that another author who wrote about North Korea, they invited him or her, I'm sorry, I don't remember, back because they wanted that person to speak. And the author had said that they weren't falling for it. So I don't think it's a positive invitation. So, yeah.
So I have so many questions.
Please.
But I was thinking that your parents must have been afraid, even if you weren't.
Yeah, I don't think
get
they
nervous
liked
when
it.
My kids
No,
travel and they have to get you
but
on Korea.
I'm a grown-up, so they couldn't stop me. But what's funny, or probably not so funny, but the day I arrived was the day we invaded Korea. But the next morning was the day that North Korea declared war on America over the James Franco movie, the interview. Yeah. So really, truly, within 24 hours of me arriving, my parents had to listen to newscasts for, see the news cycle, how busy they are reporting North Korea of merciless retaliation against America and Americans. And I was sitting in a hotel room in North Korea, not threatened at all. But they were hearing all these newscasts. And I believe during the 2 weeks I was there, there was a diplomatic incident with the president of China, and they threatened, all kinds of things throughout my entire stay. So, yeah.
So, can I keep asking?
Please, yeah.
So, I wondered did you feel angry, or did you just prepare yourself for the lies that you don't feel angry when they're telling? I mean, it's not their fault.
It's not their
obviously,
fault, right.
But how do you prepare yourself not to react, or what did you feel?
Well, first I was completely unprepared. I didn't know really anything, as naive as that sounds, but I don't usually prepare when I go on trips. I don't like to have preconceived ideas. So I didn't really know what I was getting into. And I tend not to take anything for granted. I'm very much a person who will continue asking until I get to the bottom of things. So, but I had their safety in mind. If they say the wrong thing, they risk their lives. And so I had to constantly balance my desire to get to the truth with knowing that there were grave consequences if they stepped out of line. And, a lot of the conundrum was the frustration in not really understanding what they knew and what they didn't know, what was true and what wasn't true. And some of the things that happen are so outlandish, you can't believe that it's actually happening. In the book I talk about, for example, I went to a football game. I had a cancellation on a Sunday at 5 o'clock, and you have a schedule. Everything is scheduled hour by hour. And the thing that was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 got canceled for some reason at 4 or 5 in the afternoon on Sunday. And my older handler, was offering me all of these alternatives, and they sounded terrible. And the one that sounded good she said football game, and I said, I'm in. And she was in a panic and made a million phone calls and came back finally and said, you're in luck. There happens to be a football game at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. on a Monday. And, that's the conundrum. So we arrive at the football stadium, and there's a national football game happening at 9 a.m. There's not a soul in the crowd. There's 40 people in the crowd. And, on the one hand, what luck. On the other hand, would a country go to all the trouble to stage a football game for one American? And so you go nuts. But to answer your question, you just have to relax, basically. Try not to be yourself. Yeah, but it was tough.
Did they ask you questions?
Interestingly, no. My older handler never asked any questions. She asked one at the end. Most people I met who were handlers didn't speak English, so they didn't really ask me anything. Fresh handler and we actually developed a really nice relationship, and she would secretly ask me things, but you have two handlers primarily so that neither one does anything wrong. So she was the one, fresh handler took me to the bathroom. You're not allowed to go to the bathroom by yourself. So we would have secret conversations when we would go to the bathroom. Yeah. It was very sad. So, yeah.
Have you ever been in another country in similar situation, like
No.
all Russia?
I've been to Russia. It was nothing like this. But I went, after the Soviet Union had fallen. But I've been in similar situations in terms of the poverty, but never in terms of the complete lack of free will. I mean, that's what drove me to write the book. I didn't go with the intention of writing a book. I just went on vacation. And I couldn't figure out what it was about the country that made it the worst place. And it's that combination of poverty and lack of free will. And so, no, I've never been anywhere like it. I've been maybe 85 countries, and it's the worst place. It literally is the worst and most unique place I've ever been.
Because of the lack of freedom.
It's abject.
Yeah.
It's unimaginable. Sitting here in this room, you can't imagine what that's like. It's worse than jail. I mean, at least in jail you can, you have some freedom. It's like nothing I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
So. I'm a vegetarian, and it was terrible. And I'm not that picky. I know when I try. I mean, I've gone 2 weeks eating nothing but bread in the Congo, or or whatever the case. And I can't tell you what vegetables they fed me. So I generally ate chocolate bars.
I understand they're very malnourished, and they're
Yeah.
5 inches shorter than South Koreans.
It's
They're
true.
the same race, exactly, right?
It's exactly true, and they're the most homogeneous population in terms of genetics. It was really upsetting too, because they want to prove to you that they don't have food shortages any longer. So they serve you an immense amount of food at every meal. They just would bring plate after plate after plate, and it would go largely to waste. And it was terrible. The food was terrible. I couldn't identify any of it. Yeah. So I really truly subsisted on chocolate bars mainly. So.
And were you able to buy them there?
Yeah, there was one gift shop. There's no stores. You don't, there's one gift shop in the hotel, and they had chocolate bars there, and I think I bought them all. So did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. When you first arrived, when you landed, did you land at night or during the day?
In the day.
Okay, and when you got off the plane, did you have to walk down onto the tarmac?
Yeah, I went down. Sorry, I read this thing. I went down the stairs, and there was no one there. There was no other planes. There was nothing. There was literally nothing there. Just our plane, and the guards and the the airline employees. That's it.
And what was your first impression, that split second when you got off that plane and you looked around and you saw that?
I was euphoric. I was so excited to be there. And then I was like, this is weird. Like, there's nothing here. So, that was it. I've been to so many airports that are just a dirt runway or there's nothing there. So it didn't immediately strike me how weird it was until then I thought, this is really strange. This is a major city. But the thing also, when you first drive into Pyongyang, they take you on a route that has normal-looking buildings, tall, apartment buildings, 30 stories, and everything's clean and new. And actually, my first impression was, darn, it's so normal. And it's only after you start to drive around that you realize, oh, no, this isn't normal at all. So, yeah.
I was late, but I have a note from another vegetarian. So
Sure.
Everybody else knows, but how did you get into the place? I mean, how did you...
This is a very common misperception. It's really easy, or it was for me. There's 2 agencies in China. There may be more, but when I traveled, which was 2 years ago, there's 2 agencies. And they have a relationship with the travel bureau in North Korea. The one I went with is called Koryo Tours. And they organize all the logistics. So to get a visa, you have to plan hour by hour every single activity ahead of time, and then they submit all your documents for you. And I imagine the North Koreans vet you, but I don't, that process is invisible to you. And the only hitch is that you're not actually issued a visa until 24 hours in advance. So you have to fly to China with a 50-50 chance of going to North Korea. And then they go.
It's like it's worse than jail. You're talking about the people who live there? Is it their
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not great as a tourist either. So,
I understand.
but yeah. Oh my God, it's way worse than jail.
How much do you feel you were able to see or in and find out what's going on there?
I'll tell you, I was able to see quite a bit, and it's been interesting because with the Congress last week, all of the journalists who've been there, and I've been following Anna Field in particular at the Washington Post religiously, and because I was in press, and I was alone, and I was there for such a long time, relatively speaking, I can say confidently, more than most. I saw a lot of the country. I saw a lot more places than the normal tourist goes, and handlers got tired. They're normal people. They were as tired as I was, and they, got sloppy. And just by virtue of leaving Pyongyang, I saw what was going on in other cities and in the countryside on the way to and from places. And they weren't as careful necessarily as they were with the press, for example, or a large tour group. So
Did they let you take pictures? You mentioned pictures.
they do. They let you, well, they're very restrictive. In Pyongyang, they let you take, or they say you can take pictures of anything because it's the showcase city, but even then they have restrictions on what you can take pictures of. And it's very random things. They'll yell at you all of a sudden not to take a photo, and it will be like you're taking a picture of a tree or something. Outside of Pyongyang, you're not allowed to take photos at all unless they approve it. So you have to ask before you take a single photo. But I snuck a lot of photos. And as I was saying, like my handlers, for example, they would fall asleep a lot in the car. I would sneak photos. And then, this is so terrible, I sound like a terrible person, but my handlers, I convinced them that there was no grass where I live, no green in New York, which is kind of like a little bit true. And so every time we'd be in the country driving, and we'd see grass, they would let me take pictures so I could sneak pictures of like factories and things like that. So yeah.
Did you get to talk to any of the people there? I mean,
that's another one of these weird things. No, the short answer is not really. Because you're not allowed to talk to normal people. You're only allowed to talk to people who are part of the propaganda tour, because therefore they've been, media trained. They know what they can and cannot say. But occasionally we'd run into like very large groups of children who had not yet been indoctrinated into the Young Pioneers, which is like the junior party before they become in the regular party. And these children must have been under the age of 5. And they would say hello and goodbye and behave like normal children, but otherwise no. They were the only ones. Anything older than that, not really. Yeah. So it was unusual to find jubilant, normal acting children. And I write about this in the book because I gravitate to children when I travel. I really think that they show what the country's really like. And they really showed what the country's like in North Korea. Yeah.
Did you hear anything about the economic zones that they have?
Sorry?
Economic zones they have. raise on economic zone?
Well, they have the Songbun system, the caste system, and I think I'm answering your question. So the nicest city is Pyongyang, and the 1%, the richest people live in Pyongyang. There's no freedom of travel, so you can't come into Pyongyang. You can't leave where you live unless you have permission, and you can't leave Pyongyang without permission. So when we left Pyongyang, for example, we had to go through checkpoints, and they had to show special papers, and we were stopped several times along the highway, which is like a blacktop basically, with no cars. And so, the power, and then within Pyongyang, they cut electricity and water to most parts of the city, except for to the richest people. So if you're born into a certain class, your life is the best. And if you're not in that class, your life is terrible. And it just becomes more terrible depending on what class you're in. And you don't have the opportunity to move up unless, I would hear stories, if you're, a beautiful woman, then maybe they'll come and pluck you from the countryside and make you a guide. Or if you're an expert piano player, then maybe they'll pluck you and you'll be the special piano player for the great leader. But other than that, if you're born a tree cutter, you're going to be a tree cutter the rest of your life. That's it. So.
Did you manage to take any photos of any statues of the great leader?
Oh, that's all I took photos of. Not all, but yeah, they want you to. That's propaganda. And the statues are everywhere, but there's rules. So you have to take the whole body. And then you have to first bow, and you have to, show reverence to the great leader. You can't put your back to the great leader. The main statues in downtown Pyongyang, you have to buy flowers at the bottom at a special stand, because of course they don't have any shops. It's not like there's a flower store. And you buy the flowers and you go and you put the flowers at his feet and you bow, and then you have to walk backwards so you don't show him your back. And then after all of the pomp and circumstance, then you can, take a photo.
How many times when you were there, how many times did the great leader go up on TV or radio and make an announcement? I mean, was it often or?
That's all there is. I mean, I cannot stress enough, that's it. There's not, they have maybe 2 channels, and it's piped into the homes, and it's propaganda 24/7. And the radio is the same, and in all the cities, including Pyongyang, it blasts, outside. It's all you hear. And in fact, one morning in Pyongyang, I would get woken up every morning by the loudspeakers, by this kind of warbly, weird noise. And I asked my handler, and she said to me, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, they deny everything. It's crazy, but it's in the train station. It's everywhere. And it's all, about how great the great leader is. Yeah.
Take you to any sites of the Korean conflict, of the Korean War?
Yeah, well, so I went to the DMZ, obviously, but I went, they have I can't remember the names now, I'm sorry, they're in the book, but it's like the Liberation War Museum or the American Imperialist Suck Museum, and they have every museum, and it's all wrong. Everything in there is wrong, and I mean, but it's very wrong. Here's where the American lost. Here's where the Americans lost. Here's where the Americans lost, and it's just terrible. And if you can't remember, I couldn't remember. I should have probably read American history book before I left, because some of it I was like, maybe that is right. And you can't look anything up. There's no internet. But there's, there's a point in the trip when you start thinking, do I have this wrong? But it's all propaganda. I cannot stress it enough. Yeah, it's crazy. They rewrote history. And you have to understand also, because they have no outside information whatsoever, that the people grow up, they're inculcated from birth. This is the rhetoric that they're taught. So they're not, they're not pretending. This is the history. And the trick, the problem is here, and we're taught our history.
No, I've had that discussion with Cubans.
Yeah.
I'll talk to them about Cuban history, like Batista and before Castro, and they don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, even some of the way we interpret Vietnam or our history, it's questionable in some cases, and we skew it to our favor. And yeah, it's interesting. So yeah.
History is written by the winners.
That's exactly right. If you go to Ukraine and you talk to people there about World War II or World War I, or or how they view the Russia or whatever, everybody has their opinion, and so they just do it to an extreme because they don't allow for any other opinion to be involved in the discourse. So,
How do they decide who gets educated?
I'm sorry.
How do they decide who gets educated?
I think it's based on class.
Based on class?
On your class. I mean, everyone has to, work. They're busy like cutting the grass with their, with their scissors.
But they educate the children, but just in their way, right? Do all the classes go to?
I can't answer that. I really don't know. I mean, I saw thousands, literally thousands and thousands of children in their young pioneer outfits, but that was only in Pyongyang. Outside of Pyongyang, I only saw children that looked like indigent. They were emaciated and not clothed properly. I didn't see, or in military uniforms. I never saw young pioneers outside of Pyongyang. But I did, that's actually in Kaesong, which is near the DMZ, a couple hours from the DMZ, maybe an hour and a half. I did see, it's called the Children's Palace, which I nicknamed the extracurricular jail. They did have a very large one there with children inside that, and that's where they learned the arts and such, but I don't know about the rest of the country. I wouldn't imagine that it's a top priority, but that's conjecture. So.
I'll ask one question.
Sure.
Donald Trump the other day announced that he wants to meet with a great leader. You think it's a good idea?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the only path to diplomacy is conversation. It can't hurt.
So you agree with his...
Well, I don't agree with any. Well, I don't say I don't have a political discussion, but listen, that country. The reason why there hasn't been change is because the people don't have a platform to come together and affect change. If they stand on a street corner, they'll be arrested. There's no way for the people to come together. Where there was Arab Spring or where there's been change in any other country, the Berlin Wall or through history, it's because the people were able to talk to one another or to affect the government. And in North Korea, they cannot. They've been taught to turn one another in for any infraction, and if there is an infraction, they not only will imprison or kill that person, but 3 generations of the family. It's a terrible place to live. And if meeting with the great leader will affect change and better the lives of the people, then I'm for that.
2 things come to mind. One is in Russia, when it was the Soviet Union, this was back in the 60s, I talked to somebody who went there, and the loudspeakers had all the propaganda going. It was so loud you could hardly think. But they said, well, the people in the fields, we can't deny them, so they could hear way out in the fields. And also the Aztecs, I believe it was the Aztecs, wasn't it? Over in this hemisphere. You wouldn't be able to go out of your little place, and the only people, and they had runners who would go up and down the rest of the roads, and they're the only people who were permitted to go anywhere. So it seems like a combination of the worst possible.
I've been speaking about North Korea now for some time because of the book, and I've had several people come up to me and say that it's reminiscent of the Soviet Union before it broke apart, or reminiscent of East Germany or China. Yeah.
It sounds worse.
It sounds worse.
It does sound worse. Maybe it's the way I'm telling it, but yeah, it's what's so shocking is that it exists today. That with something can happen and it's all over the internet in less than 4 minutes, and yet this whole country is still in the dark. And bits and pieces of it are starting to come in. They're smuggling X drives across the border in China. My fresh handler, the younger handler, she had seen some American films in college. I don't know how. They opened the country up to tourism because they needed money. The country's broke, and there's people like me coming in and telling them stories and disabusing their notion of what the outside world looks like. And to your point, the mindset's changing. There are people who are not 100% under the spell any longer of the great leader. They had the famine a few years back where millions died, but yet they still can't come together and do anything about it. And hopefully the Kim Jong-un will be a different kind of a person and make changes that are for the betterment of the country. Who knows?
Thank you guys. I never ask questions.
Do they have medical care
Like, did you see anything about medical care? Or what did you think?
I asked a lot about that because I was brought to a hospital where I saw 0 patients and there was no electricity and all the equipment was like underneath plastic. And I'm told that there's medical care in each of the cities, but I doubt it. I really doubt it.
So do they have birth control or do they?
I seriously doubt it.
Yeah, just all these questions.
Yeah, I doubt it. It was so rudimentary in like they're shining. They took me to the best they have to prove to me that they had the best they have, and it was terrible. So given that, I doubt it's. I would guess it's horrible everywhere else. So
Yeah,
yep.
there was an interesting documentary on that. I think it was maybe on PBS that I saw on Netflix in regards to healthcare in North Korea. That they specifically followed a doctor who went there for a week, who I think just did cataract procedures, and he spent like every day, 10 hours a day doing it, and he got through, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred patients, but that it was, the equipment he had was abysmal, and he had to like bring equipment in.
I have a whole chapter in here called Hot Dr. Dimly Lit about my visit to the Pyongyang Women's Hospital. It was theater of the absurd, no joke. It was crazy.
How do they monitor the streets? I mean, somebody's got to be everywhere making sure nobody gets together in the middle of the street.
Well, that's exactly the problem. They can't. It's like I said earlier to somebody, it's Earth.
So then people can get together and talk.
Oh, I thought you meant what I see. They can't. I mean, well, they turn each other in. First of all, it's a culture where they turn one another in. They like score points. Well, they have people who are assigned to like the leader of the apartment building, the leader of the block, the leader of the neighborhood.
They have food themselves. They have to be supplied. So there's got to be some kind of a system of distribution.
Well, they do. They have rations, but they have people who are in charge of the building, and that person is like the tattletale for the building. And then they win points. They get more rations, or they have better treatment, or.
But the overseer, whatever you want to call it, has to communicate with other people.
Right.
And so there has to be some sort of communication system, radio or whatever.
I can't speak to it. I mean, they haven't done it yet. Yeah, you would think, but maybe it's a fear of reprisal, and I would imagine. So.
There's got to be a communication system in place.
Yeah, but not one that's allowed them yet to.
Oh, not allow them.
Yeah.
I'm saying if there's a system in place of communication,
Right.
you would think there's some potential for it to be corrupted.
You would think.
for the better.
Well, now most of them have cell phones, so it's even.
Not cell phones.
They have cell phone now.
That's
The people. Well, at least the rich people. No internet yet. No.
No, there would be.
No. They have intranet now. The rich people in Pyongyang have an intranet, supposedly. Yeah. They showed it to me. If they show it to you, it's true. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've heard that culturally, since they're scared of being turned in, they don't
Yeah.
apologize. They have I forgot where I read this, that, and it was particularly with North Korean immigrants to either South Korea or to the United States, that part of their culture is that they just don't apologize. It sounds ridiculous, but I don't know if you maybe encountered that. I mean,
I just had my experiences with the people that I interacted with, but I've read what you've read, and with older handler and fresh handler, fresh handler was different. She was younger, and I think she was more Western in a way. But older handler was old school, no pun intended, and she wasn't warm. We never bonded really. If there were moments when she would sort of forget who she was, and the second she realized, she was back to herself. And judging from that, I would imagine that is the case. It's almost robotic. There's no room for error. You don't want to lose your position. The penalty is so stiff. I guess if you're raised in that environment, what choice do you have?
Sounds sort of joyless.
Yeah. But then again, joyless, I don't know. That's part of the conundrum of this book. If that's all you know, of course you're going to find joy. You're going to fall in love. You're going to have friends. You're going to have great times. You're just a human being that was born in a terrible place. And I think that was what caused me so much of the confusion and why when I came home, I couldn't let go of this trip. Because who am I to say they're not having great lives? Just because it doesn't seem like a life I want doesn't mean that there's not happiness and all of the different emotions we feel living here. And quite frankly, we have tons of our own problems. So even when I was writing this book, I really struggled because so many times I'd write something and I'd think, well, we have that same problem here. So, I don't know. What makes happiness? And who's to say that they're unhappy or happy?
Well, they're starving.
That's definitely not good. That's, an absolute. But my handlers weren't, they were living pretty well. So, but I wouldn't want to live there, that's for certain. So, yeah. Yes?
Do you think that all the different classes are aware of the other classes?
I would think
They
so.
know that their life is a whole lot different than anybody else's if they're not allowed to travel and see what else is out there.
It's an interesting question, and it parallels the question, do they know that their life is worse than the rest of the world? And I think so. I do think so. I think it's human nature, and I've told this story before, but when I was in Pyongyang, it's such a small incident, but we were sitting at a light, and a bus pulled up, and there was a queue, but when the bus pulled up, the queue sort of went a little nutty, and they all started pushing and shoving to get on the bus. And all I could think was, if life is so perfect, and the great leader is so great, and God, and all this stuff, then why are you pushing to get on the bus? You would think they would just be benevolent and cool about it all, and we're all human. You have human nature. Babies fight before they can walk. So they have to have a sense that being a tree cutter, or digging ditches from age 4 is not fun, and that there's something better out there. This is what's driven man and woman from the beginning of time to explore and invent and go west, young man, and all these things. And so I can't imagine they don't know that there's more to life than what they're living. Whether they subjugate those thoughts so that they can survive, I don't know. Yeah.
Were you the only individual in your group, in your travel group? Or
Yeah, I was alone.
Okay.
And I didn't know to bring a liaison, a Western liaison, which most people do, but I intentionally wanted to go by myself. So I went on a private solo tour, and I went for a long time.
Did you see other tourists while you were there?
I saw a lot of Chinese tourists in big groups, 30, 40 people. And I met one family one day, this Australian family that were on vacation there too. They were a family of 4. And one day, but they were there for 3 days. And then I also met 2 Canadians who were drinking the Kool-Aid. They were all in. They were like, this isn't bad at all. And then they asked me to have dinner with them. I was like, no, thank you. And that was it. Mostly Chinese tourists. Yeah.
Where did they take the Canadians?
I met them at the DMZ.
Yeah, but they didn't see anything out there.
Well, they were on a normal tour that's usually 2 days. And in 2 days, they stay very tightly controlled in Pyongyang. And what had done it, funny enough, they conflated, they'd seen the young pioneers with all the Disney backpacks.
Okay.
And somehow that to them signaled that it was a much more open society. That was what they told me. They said, we can't believe it, they have Disney backpacks. So.
Are the Chinese tourists sort of taking on that same ride around the country?
Everybody's, yeah.
Something a little bit different.
Yeah, the normal tourist program is 2 days, 3 nights, and it's generally just Pyongyang and to the DMZ and back.
So how did you get in 10 days? How could you do
I asked for it. I mean, it's not that you can't do it. Most people just are smarter than me. Don't. So, yeah.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm glad Wendy made this trip so that we don't have to. Folks, if there are no more questions, then a quick reminder for our internet audience watching at home that there is still time for you to call the number on your screen, and we can send My Holiday in North Korea to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. For those of you here in the house, we have the book for sale at the counter in the front room over there. Wendy's going to be signing here at the table to the left of the stool, and this has just been fascinating. Please give another hand to Wendy Simmons. Thanks very much. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.